I don't think that I actually got the whole truth, but what she did tell me was that she was $1,000 in credit card debt. My name is Alex, and I previously a registered nurse. I spent 11 years in the military as well, and I came across the coaching industry, I'd say back in 2009, where I had a friend that went to, I believe it was Georgetown, was doing a course or a certificate course, I believe it was, on coaching. That was the first coach I had ever interacted with, was a friend of mine. And then years went by, and I came across the coaching industry again by way of my former partner.
Gotcha. And I'm sure that's kind of an interesting dynamic of like, someone who's sort of in the industry is a coach. And I'm sure I don't want to speak on your behalf, but my assumption is that that would add like a sense of validity of like, oh, I know Sarah, she's a life coach. Like this must be a legitimate thing. And then your partner is introducing you to the same thing. So you wouldn't have like any kind of level of skepticism. Is that correct?
That's correct. I actually kind of saw the coaching world as something legitimate because of, again, how you mentioned it. I had a friend that, was somebody I trusted, and that person seemed genuine, legitimate. And then again, my former partner, was somebody that I trusted as well.
And I think that's an important distinction too, is like not to say that, and this is just my opinion, that like not all coaches are terrible. And so I think that if we do see someone who like is a coach and is doing good work, that would also make it a lot easier to fall for something that's maybe a little bit more deceptive. So I guess my next question for you is just kind of like, what was that like? Your partner comes to you, they say they found this coach, and what's kind of the premise of this relationship, or like why are they bringing this to you?
My former partner was actually a licensed therapist and wanted to transition out of the coaching world, out of the therapy world, sorry, and then went into the coaching world. And I didn't know anything about, coaching, but from there it snowballed and really, got into the more predatory side of coaching that, you see on Reddit posts and things like that.
And so did the 2 of you enter into, like, a program together? Or were you receiving coaching?
She was wanting to transition out of therapy and then started buying into all of these programs, which I'm not sure if I'm allowed to name drop them, but a lot of the common ones that are talked about. And then we had also wanted to do some relationship work, and not that anything was wrong in our relationship. We just thought it would be great and helpful for us as a couple to work on our relationship. And she had previously worked with a coach, and I thought, okay, I trust my partner, therefore I trust whoever she picks. So we started working with somebody that billed themselves as a relationship coach, and said that they had all this background and history in therapy and trainings. You go to the website and you start looking through it, and it's like you see the catchy, fleshy, names, and then yeah, I never thought about it much. I just went with what my partner seemed to, fully trust in. But yeah, that's kind of how it started.
Gotcha, and I think that that's really a very common experience, this idea of, like, especially if you're not familiar with, like, what the red flags are, things that you should be wary of. You just see, again, like, Sally on the internet, "I'm a relationship expert," and then they have all these, like, letters next to their name, and you're like, "Oh, that must be a legitimate credential," like, why else would they have it there? And so just because I get a lot of comments, obviously, of people being like, well, I don't understand how you didn't see that this person was just like a self-proclaimed guru. It's like the way that a lot of these people present themselves online is incredibly convincing. And in your circumstance, if your partner, presumably one of the people you trust the most, is guiding you, being like, yeah, let's do this together, it seems legit. Why, like, who are you to question that? Right. So I just think that that's important to emphasize, this idea of like how these people present themselves in combination with you being guided by people around you can lead to a really vulnerable situation where you're less likely to really take the time to assess what's going on. So I would love to hear if you're willing to share a little bit about what this experience was like. So you enter into this relationship coaching. What sort of was the structure of that program, the promised outcomes, and sort of what happened from there?
I try not to be hard on myself now, but it is really difficult some days to just not beat myself up because, I sometimes think, how could I not have seen this coming? How did I not get a sense of concern early on? But this was all happening in tandem with my partner being involved in like some of these big business coaching environments, and one in particular that really just consumed her. And I started noticing, like, we started in with the relationship coaching pretty early on in our relationship, and it seemed to be going pretty well. But a year or so in, I started getting a little bit frustrated because some of the things that I was seeing was, you know, there didn't seem to be a structure within our conversations or goals that we were trying to achieve. And I really questioned, what this relationship coach knew about relationships and guiding them. Because most of the time she would sit there while my partner and I talked, and there was very little input. Or if I had, a concern and I brought something up, I never felt like I got direct answers. So that was some of it, but it was so vague that I really didn't have a way to pinpoint it or identify it. And so I guess for me, ultimately looking back, the biggest point of concern is that there was really no structure in our conversations, in like the trajectory of our work with this particular coach. And anytime I tried to bring up my partner's involvement in the business coaching world that she was involved in, there was no hard questions. There were no like questions from our relationship coach to her saying, well, what do you think about this? Do you feel like there's a valid point here, a valid concern? And it always just seemed to be that my partner and I were doing all this talking in front of this, you know, other person, and that other person was just taking our money. And it was pretty expensive.
Do you mind sharing how much you spent?
Um, it was like, I want to say it was about $250 a session.
Wow.
Yeah. Meanwhile, my former partner, is dumping like $25,000 every 6 months into this business coaching world. I really was not paying attention to what she was doing with her finances because, again, I trusted her, and I trusted that she would not do anything that would put our relationship, our well being as a couple in jeopardy. It was, I don't know. I was blind to a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a lot too emotionally to deal with, to feel I'm not even sure what the correct word would be, but just to feel so helpless in like obviously they are their own autonomous human adult. And so it's not really your responsibility either to be in their bank account like, "Oh, where are you spending your money? How much are you
Mhm.
spending? How often are you spending this?" Like you want to be able to trust them like you said that they have your best interests in mind. And so I can absolutely see how you would just kind of almost turn a blind eye and hope that they're going to make decisions that are mutually beneficial. So how long, I guess, did this relationship coaching thing go on for? Like how long were you actively working with this coach?
Several years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think it was like, oh, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years at the most. Um, and it really, like, I just got more and more frustrated with it, and I started bringing up these concerns to my partner, but she was so bought into the world of coaching, and that coaching was the way to take care of everything in life. Anytime that I brought up a concern or a disagreement, um, it led to a disagreement between us, and conflict. And so I got to a point where I just didn't want to bring stuff up anymore. But ultimately the whole reason I quit working with that particular relationship coach is because I had to point out to that coach that, hey, you know what, my partner is saying these things, there are health concerns here, and I don't see you having the expertise. So I'm going to, stop working with you. And I think that was the right decision. My partner, at the time was free to make her own decision, and she kept working with that particular person.
Okay, so you left the coaching relationship. Your former partner stays actively coaching with that individual while they're also like building their own coaching business, working with business coaches, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And then within that business coaching world, they all go on these retreats, and and then there's like every other, type of coach known to man within those retreats. And so lo and behold, there's like a relationship coach, that she gets to know. And so then she starts working with that relationship coach from the coaching, you know, business world, which is just mind blowing. Like that, you get coaching from within your own little circle of like-minded, brainwashed business coaches or business coaching world, for your own relationship. So it's like this, like somewhat incestuous coaching.
That's what I always say. I'm like, it's a little bit incestuous, for lack of a better term, because everyone's coaching under, Coach
Yep.
Sally, and then me and you are both co-coaches, but then now you're paying me and I'm paying you, and we're all just like in each other's shit.
Going up that, lack of a better term, going back up to that top of that pyramid.
Exactly. It's super fascinating, I think, once you're on the outside of it and you have this sort of like external perspective and you're able to see that. But when you're in it, it seems normal. Everything is just like I obviously can't speak to your partner's experience, but I know from my own, it's like, again, if I'm coaching under Sally and Sarah's in there with me, me and Sarah become friends. I trust her. She tells me she can help me solve problem ABC. Okay, sure, I'll pay you $500 for a session. Like it's just everything escalates so quickly, I think, that you don't even have the opportunity to sit back and be like, "Wait a minute, is this a good choice? I don't know." And so I can absolutely see how slippery that slope is and how quickly things can progress. I'd be curious if you would be willing to speak to then sort of what happened in your relationship from there, because if you're kind of extracting yourself from the industry, from working with that coach, meanwhile, it sounds as though your partner is getting deeper and deeper into it. Obviously, I'm going to assume that that sort of caused friction or a rift of some sort. Would you be willing to speak to that?
Yes, yes to all of the above. I think that's the one thing that I am most passionate about people understanding now is, sure, we can talk about like all the gory details of how everything fell apart, but there was a real human cost. And the further that my former partner got into the coaching world, especially the business coaching side of things, the more friction developed between the two of us because I kept trying and trying to explain to her how ridiculous some of the language was, the absurdity of this idea of being able to make millions of dollars, like the actual probability of that happening. And then I started being labeled as a skeptic, as a naysayer, as a hater. I also was labeled as the cause for her not being able to make all this money. And it was really painful to go through all of that because all I wanted was for us to have, this um, solid relationship and for her to trust me. And the deeper she got into that group she was a part of, the more she distrusted me, the less she came to me with her problems, the more she went to them for, um, consult. And it really tore apart our relationship.
That is so incredibly heartbreaking to hear. And I really just think it proves this point that I'm often trying to make here of how akin these coaching relationships can be to cult-like behavior of
Yes.
like anyone external that opposes the belief of the group doesn't know what they're talking about. Listen to us, trust us, pay me lots of money. And I can't even imagine being in your position where especially when you gave it a shot. It's not just like from the get-go, you were like, "Coaching's baloney, I don't want anything to do with it." You were in it, you said you actively were being coached for multiple years. Red flags started to go off. Now all of a sudden you're like, not for me." And now you're rather than your partner taking your side, being like, "You know what? Maybe you're right." It's scary to think that they can have built so much trust with these people that they quite frankly don't know and who are presumably financially benefiting off of them. They now choose to side with them. Like that is such an incredibly like it's so difficult for me to wrap my head around how challenging that would have been for you and how helpless you must have felt in that situation.
I felt incredibly helpless. I felt very angry, very isolated, and it wasn't like I could even go to her friends, within that group and say, "Hey, do you realize the detrimental, I don't know, effects that are because of you all and what you are preaching to each other?" Because they're all one entity. There wasn't a single, separate thought from what the group leader was preaching to them. And I tried to be supportive. I really did in the very beginning. I was like, I'm supportive of you wanting to change careers and like, um, you do what you need to do to like make that transition happen. I'm here to support financially. Thankfully, I did not actually like give my own money other than, with our relationship coaching. But, I'm here to help pay the mortgage. I'm here to help buy groceries. I'm here to like just do the daily stuff with. And you do what you need to do to make this transition. So yeah, I felt pretty resentful towards the end where I felt like I had nobody in my corner and I couldn't explain it. And unless you're living that experience, it's kind of like, well, why don't you just tell them this is nonsense. And but it is such a gospel, it is such a religion
Exactly.
that people fall into that you cannot just sway their mind. I remember even trying, present my concerns by using a like coach that had a podcast that was also like pointing out some of the concerns. And I can't even remember who this person was, but I sent the link to my former partner, and her response was like, "Oh, she's considered to be one of the mean girls." And it's like, I mean, okay, so now we're using high school language where it's like the mean girls. It's like, no, this person has some real concerns. And a lot of it was like, stuff that I was trying to talk to her about. It was a lot to go through.
Yeah, I again, I can't even imagine what that would have been like. Um, what what has transpired since? Like what was the resolution to that? Obviously, we can all make assumptions, but if you're comfortable sharing, I would love to hear.
It's something that I'm still trying to work through today. It's been over right at a year and a half, if not a little bit more than a year and a half since everything came to a head. Ultimately, there was a situation where it was early in the morning. My partner woke me up from a dead sleep, was telling me that she was not feeling well. I proceeded to sit her down on the couch. I tried to ask her, what's going on. Within moments, she became unresponsive, stopped breathing, and had a massive seizure. I then called 911. EMS shows up. She had come to by that point, and I was talking to the paramedics, explaining what happened. They, rightly stated she needed to go to the hospital, and to my shock, she refused. Um, she ended up telling them that it was fine, that I was a critical care nurse, that I'd be able to handle whatever. And I'm still there in shock thinking, yes, I do have a pretty extensive, nursing background. And yes, I can manage a patient that is having a seizure in the hospital with the correct equipment and medications. Um, but she refused. I was then required to sign the documentation that I was a witness to her refusal, and they left. And, I still have this image of her, going unresponsive, and I'm replaying this over and over and over again, as I'm trying to understand why she refused. And I started to think about, some of the things that she had been saying in the months prior. And in particular, she had started to become really focused on finances, and she had been very concerned about, like, oh, she didn't have money for this bill or that, and she wanted me to cover for certain things. And I didn't think much about it then, but then I started putting it together, and I went to her and I said, you know, I need to know how much debt you're in right now. And her response was like, why does that matter? And I said, you're asking me to gamble with your life right now. You refuse to go to the hospital, and I need to know what I'm up against. And I told her that my assumption was that she was multiple thousands of dollars in debt. And I don't think that I actually got the whole truth, but what she did tell me was that she was $50,000 in credit card debt, and that, that was one of the reasons why she had refused to go to the hospitals. She didn't have any more money. I was completely floored. Um, I started asking her, well, how did this happen? And she was telling me about, like, how this business coach that ran this group encouraged her to put some of the, financial burden onto her credit cards, like, to continue to be part of this group. And ultimately, after many months after she left, I started sitting down to do the math with one of my friends, and I think it was probably closer to $75,000 of debt on a credit card from all of this coaching, because she had also paid, some of these people who she considered her friends, like $10,000 here, $5,000 there. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, she hadn't signed a new client in over a year. So where was any of that money, coming from to pay for all of this? So that's how I found out about the debt. That is, ultimately, I told her, I was like, I'm more than happy to, like, figure this out with you, and we will figure out some way to address this debt. But my only request is that you cut all ties with these people. She refused, and within a week she was gone.
That is, first of all, horribly traumatic, the whole situation. Especially, like, even the debt piece of just being completely blindsided. I can't even imagine what that would feel like. Basically, you offered to help find some sort of solution. Her response was to deny the help and just leave the relationship altogether.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. That's so awful. I'm so sorry. This story is like, it just, oh my goodness. Have you been what has it been like? Obviously, you said this was about a year and a half ago. What has your healing process been like since that? Because obviously that's a massive situation to overcome. And I imagine it's had its own challenges in itself.
It's incredibly heartbreaking to watch the person that you deeply love choose other people in this, like, fantasy of extensive wealth, over a very real day-to-day interaction, love and devotion. And for the longest time, I could not wrap my head around it. And, part of my healing journey has been ensuring that I received appropriate therapy. And that is something that continues today. I understand wanting to have a feeling of acceptance and belonging in society. And so I don't fault anybody for that. I've experienced the same thing in my own life. However, there is a choice that has to be made by everyone. And that's kind of where I draw the line of responsibility, where it's no longer my responsibility to like take on that burden. My partner made a choice. My former partner made a choice, and I offered my continued loyalty. That was rejected, and it just comes down to, like, for me, is just working on coming to a point of acceptance and kindness towards myself, but also, I've watched kind of from the shadows a little bit, just looking at Reddit groups and stuff like that. And I don't want my entire identity to be defined by this particular incident. However, I do want to ensure that I share my experience, because I know how awful it was for me to go through that and to continue to work through it. And if there's just like some way I can convince somebody or share enough of my story, um, that prevents somebody else from having to go through that. Not that I'm trying to like be the savior or anything like that, but I don't think I would be doing humanity any good by not talking about this either, you know? So, really for me, it's just been, like, coming out of this and trying to find some sense of healing has just been about ensuring that I get legitimate, therapeutic help, being willing to talk about it in the appropriate settings. And also, like, trying, there's still a lot of anger that I have towards this situation. And so it's almost a daily thing to try to work through some of that anger. Like, less and less now, but in the very beginning, like, trying not to let that anger get a hold of me to the point where I then destroy myself as well.
Yeah, I really do sincerely appreciate hearing your perspective, particularly because I often will get comments from people asking my wife, my best friend, my sister, my mom, whoever is sucked up in this coaching world, and I don't know how to get through to them. And you're the first person I think that I've spoken with in like an interview context who's been in that position, who's kind of the outsider trying to get through to this person. And so I really truly think that listening to this story is going to validate the experience of a lot of people in the audience who haven't directly themselves necessarily been in the coaching industry, but are sort of on the outside feeling helpless, feeling like they don't know what to do. And I think your point about, kind of surrendering and just having to accept that, like, you can't, no matter what you say, you can't get through to a lot of what these people seem to think or believe, or the environments that they've found themselves in. And so just understanding that, I guess it's not necessarily your responsibility to try and force yourself into that, because ultimately, like anything in life, we often just want to learn from or learn our own mistakes, not have someone tell us that we're making one, right? So I really do appreciate you for coming on and for vulnerably sharing this situation, because I'm sure it's obviously not easy still. And I really think that you are going to help a lot of people just based on the conversations that I've had anecdotally.
If I was going to say anything to anybody else that was in my position, I would let them know that they cannot blame themselves. Um, Again, everybody, has this freedom to make their own choices, their own decisions. And the rhetoric that is, presented, it's literally a gospel in these business circles, these business coaching circles, is so intense and so full of pop psychology, all the catchwords, the buzzwords, I mean, I have a whole list of words that just set me off now, but mindset being one of them. Don't talk to me about my mindset. um, there's really not a lot that you can do. You can try to have, these conversations. You can try to gently encourage somebody to step away, but beyond that, It is a hold, like, something I have never seen, and definitely mirrors a lot of cult-like behavior, um, that I have seen, and I would also caution anyone to steer away from using, words like psychopaths or, toxic, and because those kinds of things are not gonna go over well with the person that you're trying to encourage to get out of that. If anything, it's just gonna make them dig deeper into their, hard-held beliefs, and a lot of these groups are very much geared to, using fear tactics like, "Oh, your spouse, your partner, they'll leave you once you get rich." I mean, that was never my plan. If somebody can reduce the day-to-day struggle, I'm all there with you.
I'm actually waiting for the day that I don't have to work anymore, so let me know. Call me.
Yeah, yeah. Same.
Well, thank you again. This is such a great conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing your advice at the end there and just being so transparent in your experience. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Big shout out to Alex for coming on to share her story. I think that this is a really unique conversation, given the fact that everyone that I've talked to on the channel so far is someone who they themselves fell prey to the predatory approaches found in the coaching industry. And so for me, it was super eye opening to hear the experience from someone who is directly adjacent to what's going on. This was incredibly heartbreaking to listen to. Even in the playback editing it, I was tearing up. I am just so incredibly thankful that she was willing to come on and share her story. And I know that there's going to be someone watching this going through something similar, nodding along and finally feeling seen and heard. So big thank you to Alex. I did also want to include that she did email me and say that I hope someone can find some benefit from our conversation. And if you get questions that I can help answer, I'm open to talking again. So that being said, if those of you watching do have questions related to Alex's specific situation or advice that you're looking for if you're someone going through something similar, please be sure to leave those down in the comments. Also, if you're watching this video and you have your own scam story, whether you got scammed, your partner got scammed, it doesn't matter. You can leave that in the form that's linked in the description down below as well. I want to take this time to thank the channel members, specifically the millionaire VIPs and those of you in the billionaire tier. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. YouTube thinks you're going to like this video over here, so I'll leave that on screen for you. Take care, comb your hair, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!